Chapter 3. Fuzzy. "What is it?" asked Robert. He tried to stay cool. "It's a tarantula," said Susanna Lee. "Her name is Fuzzy." "Fuzzy?" "Yes. She has 8 adorable fuzzy legs. See?" Robert didn't think adorable was the right word. Tarantula legs were definitely not adorable. "Are you going away?" he asked. "No," said Suzanne Lee. "My cat Fluffy is jealous. I'm afraid he'll hurt Fuzzy if I keep her." How could a monster spider and a killer cat have names like Fuzzy and Fluffy? "For how long?" asked Robert. Forever," said Suzanne Lee. Robert opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Please," she smiled sweetly. "Don't be afraid, Robert. She won't hurt you if you are gentle." Robert swallowed. I have to ask my father." Robert left Suzanne Lee standing in the doorway while he went to ask his father if he could keep a tarantula in the house. Of course he would say no. Then that would be that. Pets were messy. Robert's dad hated any kind of mess. He was so neat and fussy that he turned all the cans in the cupboard face out so he could read the labels. "Sure," said Mr. Dorfman when Robert explained about Fuzzy. "Huh?" Robert couldn't believe it. "You've always wanted a pet," said his dad. "This is a good way for you to have one. It's small enough to keep in your room, and I'm sure you will keep its tank clean." "Great," said Suzanne Lee when Robert told her. "Here's $10 from my birthday money. It's all I have." Then she handed him the tank. Robert stared at Fuzzy. Her beady eyes stared back at him. She moved her big hairy legs, and Robert felt his skin prickle. "Feed her once a day. Here's some food." Suzanne Lee held out a box, and Robert took it. He didn't ask what was in it. It was bad enough knowing he had to sleep in the same room as a tarantula. The attack of the giant tarantula. That night, Robert could not sleep. Noises came from the tank on his bookcase. He was sure Fuzzy was trying to get out. He lay there stiff as a mummy, waiting for the scratching to stop. Robert was so tired in school the next day that he jumped when Mrs. Brenthal called on him. He missed 2 easy spelling words on a test and lost his place when they were reading aloud. "Wake up, Robert. We're on page 4, said Mrs. Bernthal. The next night was even worse. Robert wrapped the covers around him so tightly he couldn't move his arms and legs. Scratch, scratch. Robert tried to ignore the sound. He imagined Fuzzy growing into a huge monster, a giant tarantula. She burst out of her tank and jumped onto his bed. Chomp, chomp. She chewed through the blankets. Soon she would nibble his toes. Robert tried to swat Fuzzy, but something held his arms down. He leaped out of bed, tangled in the covers. Crash! He knocked over Fuzzy's tank. Charlie ran in and flipped on the light. "Hey, little bro, what's up?" "A giant tarantula is loose," Robert screamed. He leaped back onto his bed, leaving his covers behind. "Giant tarantula," said Charlie. "You mean your itty-bitty spider?" Charlie checked under the bed. He looked in Robert's closet. "There's nothing here," he reported. "Did you check your bed?" Robert flew off the bed. His bare feet hit the cold floor. He prayed he would not step on anything that moved. Robert's mom and dad came into his room. "What's going on?" asked Mr. Dorfman. Robert was so scared he couldn't talk. All of a sudden, Charlie burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" asked Robert. Charlie pointed to the corner of the room. "There's your giant tarantula." There was Fuzzy, fast asleep in Robert's slipper. Buster. After that, Robert was no longer afraid of Fuzzy. He even grew to like her. It was nice having company in his room when he did his homework or played computer games. Now Fuzzy's nighttime noises sounded friendly. "Tarantulas make good pets," he told Paul at lunch one day. He had just finished reading a book about spiders. "Don't they bite?" asked Paul. "Only if you scare them, and you won't die or anything." Robert pulled a piece of bologna out of his sandwich and ate it. "Hi, Paul." Lester Willis put his tray down and sat next to Robert. "Yo, Robert, I found a rabbit in my backyard. Could you keep it?" I don't know, Lester." Keeping a rabbit was not in Robert's dog-walking plans. "He's no trouble. I even made him a cage. And I'll pay you." "How come you can't keep him?" "My mom says 5 kids is enough. I'm trying to change her mind." "I'll have to ask my mom." "Cool." For sure the answer would be no this time, Robert thought. Rabbits were bigger and probably made bigger messes than birds or tarantulas. After school, Robert found his mom in the living room. "Mom, Lester wants me to take care of his rabbit." "That's nice, Rob." Mrs. Dorfman straightened the magazines on the coffee table. "He wants me to keep it here until he can take it to his house." His mother stopped fussing with the magazines. "Robert, I know how hard it is to start a new business," she said after a moment. "If the rabbit stays in your room, I think I can convince your father it's okay." "Really?" "Really." Robert called Lester. "My mom says it's okay." Lester let out a hoot. Robert held the phone away from his ear. "I'll be over tonight. My dad can bring me in the truck." Everyone in Robert's family liked the big white rabbit. "His name is Buster," Lester said. "He looks like a giant Easter bunny," Robert's dad said. Mrs. Dorfman held Buster and talked baby talk to him. "Poor guy, must have been in a fight," said Charlie. He pointed to Buster's left ear. It looked like it had been torn. Lester handed Robert a box of rabbit food. He also likes carrots. "Okay," said Robert, patting Buster's head. Lester's rabbit was the closest thing Robert had ever had to a dog. Robert's Zoo. One day when Robert got home from feeding the birds, his mom met him at the door. She looked sad. He knew something was wrong. "Mrs. Glass's daughter called," his mom said. "Mrs. Glass is not getting better. She's going into a nursing home, and they don't allow pets." "What will happen to Flo and Billy?" Robert asked. "Mrs. Glass would like you to keep them." "Really?" "Yes," said his mom. "Your father can help you get them from her house tomorrow afternoon." What was wrong with his parents? Suddenly his room was a zoo, and they didn't seem to mind. The next day, after getting Flo and Billy settled in his room, Robert sank into the sofa in the living room. On TV, a news reporter was interviewing a man dressed up as the Easter Bunny. Robert's dad came in and sat down next to him. "Well, Tiger, business is booming, isn't it?" "I guess," said Robert. "I think you are showing excellent enterprise." Robert knew that his dad was giving him a compliment, even though he didn't know what enterprise meant. How could he explain that all he wanted was a dog to play with, and instead he'd ended up with a tarantula, 2 doves, and a rabbit? "Where does the Easter Bunny go to fill his baskets?" said a voice from the TV. It was a commercial for Banbury's chocolates. Robert turned to look and saw a big white rabbit sitting next to a basket with a yellow bow on the handle. The basket was filled with chocolate bunnies and pink candy eggs. "To Banbury's, of course," the voice continued. Robert studied the rabbit closely. It looked just like Buster. It even had the same torn ear. Buster's surprise. The school bus was coming in 5 minutes. Robert checked on the animals as usual. "Good morning, Fuzzy," he said, tapping lightly on her tank. "Good morning, Buster." He looked in Buster's cage and gasped. "Mom!" he cried. "Come quick!" Mrs. Dorfman came running. "Oh, my," she said. "Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my! Buster had babies!" "But Buster is a boy." "Apparently not," said Mrs. Dorfman. "Don't miss the bus, Rob. We'll deal with this later." Lester was happy at first to hear the news when Robert told him at lunch. 7 babies? Way to go, Buster! Then Robert reminded him, "Now there are 8 rabbits to worry about instead of 1. Lester stopped smiling. "What do I do now?" Robert wished he knew. "We'll think of something." "We?" Lester asked. "Sure," Robert shrugged. "After all, the bunnies were born in my house." Robert's mom was very clear about what to do. "You have to get rid of them." "How?" "Take them to the animal shelter." "What will they do with them?" Robert asked. "They'll try to have them adopted." Robert was afraid to ask the next question. What happens if they're not adopted? "They can't afford to keep all the animals they get," Mrs. Dorfman said. Her voice got softer. "If nobody wants them, they may put them to sleep." Robert felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "You mean forever, right?" His mom nodded. "The only other way is to find homes for them yourself. If you promise me you'll try to do that, you can keep them until they are big enough to be separated from their mother." "I promise!" Robert cried. He was sure it would be easy. Everyone would want a bunny.